So this is the articulated robot example for AGX Dynamics for Unity. So it's a universal robot that we are simulating with the AGX Dynamics physics. And if I start the simulation, I control it with a gamepad or a keyboard. I don't have a gamepad connected, so I will try to control the robot with my keyboard, which is really hard. If you want to manipulate another object, you can do an import from a CAD object. And if you have just a simple object and you have access to the Pixyz plugin for Unity, you can use that to import the object. It will be imported as a tri-mesh, and then you can add AGX components to that tri-mesh so that you can have it in your simulation and interact with it. So I will show how to do that. If you have a more complex model of machine that you want to import, more complex mechanical system, I recommend using AGX Momentum to do the import and preparation for simulation. It's the ANSYS Space Claim plugin that we have to simplify that process. So I'm going to use Pixyz import model, and I have a simple metallic bracket that I will import. Let's see if I can move it somewhere on the table here. I think I'll also rotate it a bit to make it easier to see. So this is some sort of bracket. And if I start a simulation, this is just a game object that will float in space. There is no way to interact with it. And I have this really slow laptop that I'm doing the recording on, so I apologize for that. And you see it will just float in space. And if I would try to do some interaction with this, there's no collisions or anything. So that's not what we want. So I will stop this simulation. And we have this imported tri-mesh. And then I will add a component in the inspector. And when you have AGX Dynamics installed, you get these options. You can do a rigid AGX Dynamics rigid body. That will give you a rigid body component with mass properties, inertia, and dynamic properties like linear and angular velocity. But we also want to have a collision shape for it. So we will use this tool. There are a couple of different ways to do this. You can find it in the documentation, but I will use this tool, create shape from visual. And I can click on that object I want to use and select the mesh. So this will create the collision shape from the mesh model. And we can see if I expand this that it has created this collision mesh. And the collision is enabled. And now press play, start a simulation. It should be simulated with AGX dynamic physics and collision detection. Okay, let's see if I'm able to steer this robot. trying to get a grip of it. But you can see that it's colliding and it has nice properties. And one thing you would notice is that we haven't really set any properties for friction or stuff like that, and what type of solver to use for the gripper. So the next step would be to define a shape material for this metallic piece and shape object. Is it called that? Shape material for the metallic and contact material. So the contact material is basically that you define when you have two different materials interacting, you set the properties for each material and the friction model to be used between those. So you always define the friction between two materials. And in this example, the gripper fingers are already defined, so you can find the material for the finger, the properties, and there's also the contact material pair for the fingers and these objects. You can look at that and see how they are defined and do something similar with a metallic piece.